Will Ghana's new president, John Mahama, have the courage and clarity to remind the West that he is a leader in his own right, not a puppet? His recent electoral victory is more than a national political success. It's a signal of a broader continental shift. If anyone still thinks Africa will continue to be a passive player while the West dictates its future, they are mistaken. Mahama's leadership marks a seismic change, a break from an era when Western interests consistently overrode African priorities. This isn't just about Ghana's foreign policy. It's about an Africa rising to claim its place on the global stage and rejecting a legacy of economic and political exploitation. Mahama isn't just taking the reins of power, he's reclaiming Ghana's soul. His agenda goes beyond ceremony or symbolism. For too long, Ghana has depended heavily on Western loans, foreign-owned businesses, and development aid. This dependence has locked the country into a vicious cycle of debt and underdevelopment. But Mahama wants out. He's focused on economic liberation, on building a Ghana that doesn't survive on handouts but thrives on self-reliance. He has pledged to implement bold reforms over the next 4 years to steer the country away from the abyss left behind by the previous administration and toward a path of true independence. This vision of sovereignty is especially critical now, as US President Donald Trump has imposed new import taxes on African goods, threatening to undercut African economies even further. These taxes are a stark reminder of how vulnerable Africa remains when it depends on foreign markets. Mahama understands this. His plans to boost local industries, support domestic agriculture, invest in infrastructure, and promote technological innovation are all part of a broader strategy to ensure Ghana and Africa can stand on its own 2 feet, no matter what trade policies the West decides to impose. But Mahama isn't doing this just for Ghana. His leadership offers a blueprint for the rest of the continent. African nations can no longer afford to keep begging the West for help, while their economies remain extractive and dependent. The answer lies in regional collaboration and unity. Ghana, under Mahama, is positioning itself as a leader in this movement, joining countries like Burkina Faso and Mali that are increasingly rejecting Western dominance. Together, they are advancing a vision of Africa that's free from neo-colonial influence. Mahama sees the future in African hands. Organizations like the African Union and ECOWAS have long championed unity and economic cooperation, but now Ghana is stepping up to help lead that charge. The priority is no longer to appease global powers, but to strengthen continental ties and build an African economy that serves African people first. Under Mahama, Ghana is not just defending its own interests. It's championing a new era of African dignity, resilience, and independence. Mahama's leadership goes far beyond the usual political maneuvering or securing international agreements. His vision is rooted in building a true network of solidarity among African nations. Think of it as the beginning of a new family, one that recognizes that when one African country rises, the entire continent benefits. This vision is not only about boosting GDPs or attracting investors. It's about creating a united front against the lingering grip of neocolonialism. His alliances with leaders in countries like Burkina Faso and Mali are not based solely on mutual economic gain, but on a shared mission to resist Western interference and reclaim African sovereignty. One of the boldest demonstrations of this defiance came when Ghana announced it would shut down all US military bases on its soil. This wasn't a sudden or reckless move. It was a carefully calculated decision that sent a powerful message to the West. Ghana will no longer be used as a pawn. For years, the US justified its military presence across Africa with claims of helping to fight terrorism and maintain regional stability. But Mahama and the people of Ghana saw through that narrative. The military bases, instead of serving Ghanaian interests, often represented Western influence and control. The decision to remove them was a clear assertion of Ghana's right to manage its own security and set its own agenda. But this movement isn't just Ghana's fight. Across the continent, a similar awakening is unfolding. Nations like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are also expelling foreign forces, closing down US military sites, and declaring their autonomy. This growing resistance is not a coincidence. It's a coordinated, organic wave of self-determination. Africa is rising with one voice, demanding to be treated as an equal in the global arena. No longer content to be the silent player in global politics, African nations are refusing to let their lands be used as battlegrounds for foreign interests. Meanwhile, the US continues to operate over 24 military installations across Africa, particularly in regions marked by conflict. Despite earlier conversations about scaling back, the current US administration shows no signs of retreating. This continued presence raises serious questions about transparency and sovereignty, especially in countries where such operations often bypass national legal frameworks. Take Cape Verde, for example, a small island nation that has become a crucial military foothold despite minimal global attention. The expansion of foreign military power, especially when done quietly, is being increasingly questioned by African leaders and citizens alike. This is more than a military issue. It's a movement to reclaim the future of Africa. The closure of foreign bases signals a pivotal shift in African politics. It represents a continent no longer content with begging for scraps at the global table. African nations are standing tall, saying clearly, "We will define our own future." But the big question remains, how will the West respond? Will it retaliate, seek to reimpose control, or finally respect Africa's growing unity and independence? One thing is certain, the old dynamic, where the West dominated and Africa submitted, is disappearing. For centuries, Africa has been treated as the world's dumping ground, its resources exploited, its people disregarded, its sovereignty dismissed. But Mahama and others like him are writing a new chapter. This is about equity, justice, and mutual respect. Africa is no longer asking politely for a seat at the table. It's building its own. Under Mahama's leadership, Ghana is not merely rejecting foreign control. It's offering a blueprint for how the continent can demand fair partnerships and finally break the chains of economic and political dependency. The West now faces a choice: adapt to a new Africa that demands dignity, or be left behind in a world that is rapidly evolving. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Africa is no longer waiting to be invited to the global stage. It's taking its seat boldly and unapologetically. The whispers of resistance that once floated through corridors of power across the continent have grown into a roar. Over the next decade, the narrative is shifting dramatically. Africa is stepping out of the shadows of resource exploitation and Western domination. Under leaders like John Mahama, Ghana is setting an example of what true independence and leadership can look like, inspiring other nations to follow suit. This isn't about confrontation for the sake of it. It's about self-respect, dignity, and the determination to reclaim Africa's destiny. For too long, Africa has been wrongly framed as a charity case, dependent, helpless, and perpetually in need of rescue. This damaging perception has been encouraged by the West to justify its interference. But in truth, Africa is rich, immeasurably rich. It possesses the food, energy, minerals, and intellectual capital necessary not only for its own survival, but to fuel the global economy. Africa doesn't need oil or food from the outside world. It doesn't need imported jewels, uranium, coal, or even technology. The continent has everything it needs within its borders. And increasingly, its young leaders are embracing this truth. From Accra to Addis Ababa, a new generation of Africans is embracing the Pan-African vision, a united, independent, and self-sustaining continent. Mahama's leadership is not a lone spark, but part of a wildfire of change sweeping across Africa. No longer interested in military support or conditional aid, African leaders are crafting homegrown solutions to continental challenges. The era of dependency is ending. Africa doesn't need to be saved. It needs space to grow, to innovate, and to lead. And that's exactly what it's beginning to do. The rest of the world isn't ready for this shift, but it's happening regardless. The continent is preparing to rewrite global rules, asserting itself as a serious power with a youthful, ambitious population and a deep well of natural resources. Africa is no longer a passive player. It is stepping into its role as a major actor in the international order. For too long, it has been manipulated, ignored, and exploited. But that time is over. Today, Africa is bold, confident, and ready to shape the future. With its strategic location, growing economies, and unmatched resource wealth, Africa is emerging as the next global powerhouse. And the world needs more strong nations. The old order, where a handful of countries dictated terms to the rest, is beginning to crumble. A multipolar world is forming, and Africa is becoming one of its key pillars. What does Africa bring to the table? Everything. From oil and agriculture to rare minerals like cobalt and lithium. Essential to the tech and defense industries, Africa sits at the heart of the next economic frontier. But beyond raw materials, the continent's greatest asset may be its people. With the average age under 20, Africa boasts the youngest population on Earth. This isn't just a statistic, it's a game changer. These young people are not waiting to be consumers. They want to be innovators, entrepreneurs, and decision makers. A tech-savvy, self-aware, and visionary generation is emerging, ready to transform Africa into a hub of innovation and industry, not just a warehouse of cheap labor. The continent's shift is already underway. The West's grip is loosening. Its traditional strategies, divide and conquer, economic manipulation, political interference, are no longer working. African nations are forging new alliances, not just with one another through the African Union and ECOWAS, but with global players like China and Russia, who offer partnerships built on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. These new relationships are being pursued with strategic intent, aimed at securing Africa's future, not mortgaging it. Of course, the West is watching closely and nervously. As countries like China deepen their influence in the Horn of Africa and other key regions, US leaders are beginning to realize the strategic importance of the continent, especially for access to critical minerals. Legislative efforts like the Reshore Act are attempts to claw back influence by reducing reliance on Chinese-controlled African resources. But the truth is, Africa now holds the upper hand. The rest of the world is lining up to partner with the continent, not because of charity, but because Africa is essential. The big question now is, will the West adapt? Will it finally treat Africa as a partner and not a pawn? Or will it resist, attempting to preserve the outdated dynamics of control? Either way, the outcome is clear. Africa is rising, not by permission, but by right. The world is shifting, and Africa is not just part of that change, it is leading it. This moment marks the dawn of a new global order. A multipolar world where power is not concentrated in the hands of a few, but shared across regions. In this emerging landscape, Africa will no longer play the role of the underdog. It will be recognized as an equal player, respected not just for its abundant resources, but for its leadership, vision, and unwavering will to define its own path. Ghana's recent decision to ask the United States to withdraw its military presence is not just a bold national move. It's a continental statement. This is sovereignty in action. Ghana isn't merely saying, "We don't need you." It's sending a clear message. We will no longer lease out our autonomy. By ordering the closure of US military installations, Ghana has made a move that echoes across borders. It is a moral, political, and symbolic stand that challenges a centuries-old paradigm. Every African nation should recognize the courage in Ghana's stance. This is leadership rooted in principle, not fear. For far too long, Foreign powers have maintained influence through military bases and so-called stabilization efforts, often advancing their own interests under the guise of security. Ghana is disrupting that narrative. It's not about anti-West sentiment. It's about pro-Africa sovereignty. Of course, this decision might unsettle Western powers. It may be labeled as rash, destabilizing, or even reckless. But let's be honest. What's truly destabilizing is a system that robs nations of their agency under the pretense of partnership. Africa doesn't need permission to be bold. It needs leaders who are unafraid to disrupt the status quo and reclaim control over their lands, decisions, and destinies. The West must come to terms with this reality. Africa is no longer just a strategic pawn on the geopolitical chessboard. The time has come to stop treating Africa like a subordinate and start engaging with it as an equal. Ghana's decision is not an isolated event. It's a signal flare, illuminating a broader awakening across the continent. Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.